All right. Well, today we have a really special episode for the Digital Recruiter podcast. I'm joined by Theresa Balsiger, the Vice President and Candidate Relations at Carex Consulting Group. She's been there for the last 6 years. She's been in recruiting for the last 16 years, has extensive background building and running recruitment delivery teams, working with Fortune 500 clients and startups alike. They built a pretty unique culture, really successful culture, and I thought it'd be just a really interested to for you and our the digital recruiter audience and listeners to kind of hear their story. Right, I get a lot of questions on how to build firms, how to scale firms, and to kind of hit that next level that I know a lot of listeners are hoping to get to with their firm. And so I thought it'd be great to have her on today. So Teresa, thanks for being
Thanks
here.
so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here today.
Of course. Awesome. Well, let's likewise. There's gonna be a lot to talk about. A loaded
Always is.
conversation. I know. I always is. I know. When we met a few weeks back, I was like, "All right, like you guys are doing things the right way, talking about things the right way, run the systems, and you've been doing it for a while." And we have a lot of listeners that are just building. A lot of them are building firms, right, or have built the last few years. It's like, how do I add teams? How do I
Right.
manage teams? How do I come through for clients? Like all the kind of the navigating. So we're gonna get into
Cool.
all that. But we always got to start. How'd you get into
It's
recruiting?
such Whenever I recruit for TA talent, it's my favorite question because everyone always has such a unique story. There are very few people who are in
Yes.
college going, you know what I would love to do? It's talent acquisition. Um, I was a little bit of an HR nerd, but I didn't start that way. So my background was always, I had that approach, and you hear this very commonly from candidates, is that I just really want to help people, right? Like I want to make the world a better place,
Yeah.
but the nuts and bolts is like I really want to make an impact on people's lives. And so, of course, the direction that pushed me was to healthcare, right? So I started, did a lot of Anat and Phys courses and loved healthcare, and I was down that path. And then I did 1 hour of job shadowing, which I highly recommend for those out there who aren't sure what they want to do. Job shadowing is where it's at. 1 hour, it took me to realize that while I love healthcare, I actually don't like touching people, right? So that's a little bit of a
That's an important realization to make before you start investing, right, in nursing school and
it's kind of
everything else.
vital, isn't it?
It's
So,
yeah, yeah. The boundary is a phone call. Yeah,
right.
the stories come
Yeah,
into play. I get it.
yeah.
Yeah,
So,
it makes sense.
was a little crushed, frankly. I'd done all this coursework and was a little lost and came home for Christmas, saw my grandmother who had been in HR her whole career and sort of worked her way up to a very important role at Sears back in the day.
Yeah.
And she said,
Oh
well, what
yeah.
about business? What about HR? And I was like, oh, grandma, that's like you did that. That's cool. It seems boring to me. Business seems boring. Clearly had no idea what I was talking about. And but it was enough of a nudge for me to do a little exploration. Again, another job shadow. I had a friend of the family who was in HR and spent 1 day with her and thought, okay, this is absolutely what I want to do. This is really fun. She was in more of an employment relations kind of role. And so I initially started
Yeah.
thinking, okay, I'll get my degree in business, then I will get an HR generalist role, then I will be a director, then I will be a VP, right? That was my 18-year-old,
That's
yeah,
the plan.
yeah,
Yeah.
vision of how the world works. Um, quickly
Nice.
learned that, I graduated from college in 2008. It was not a great time to be graduating.
That's a fun time.
Yeah.
I was a year later, so I was looking at you graduates being like, "Uh-oh."
Mhm.
Like, "Should I switch my major this year?
Yeah.
What should my major be?" Yeah, that was a tough time for
It
us.
was a
Yeah.
curious time and, arguably the worst time to start in talent acquisition. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but had an opportunity to interview with a staffing company. I was basically there to say, hey, like, I just need a job. I need to work. They actually had an opportunity within the company. And so started kind of earning my stripes in administrative staffing, right? So the type of company it was a um, you know, 60-year-old company at the time. They had a really well-run shop, still do, and it was staffing and recruiting for administrative roles. So, the school district needs a receptionist tomorrow. I'm on the case,
Yeah.
right? Picking up the phone, smiling,
Absolutely.
dialing, a lot of that sort of Rolodex kind of effort. Uh, and spent a couple years doing that. Then had this really unique opportunity. At that time, they were just putting the foundational blocks of retained search and executive search together, and said, "Hey, we could use an associate, right? Someone who doesn't really know what they're doing but wants to learn." And so then
Yeah.
did that for a lot of years. So my background is a lot of actually executive searches is sort of where I started.
Nice. So you definitely got the full mix. So you went from healthcare, don't want to touch
Mhm.
people, to HR, where they very much encourage you not to
Yeah.
touch people. So it's a much better fit. So that's a smart shift. Thank you,
Yeah.
Grandma. And the ultimate
Yep.
recruiter, right? And so you get there. So the staffing, I'm with you. I started skill trades, general labor, and it's just like I made 3 placements my
Yeah.
third day because it's just like we go to works, right? We need people, and man, do you learn a lot real
That's just
quick.
it.
Like number one, if this is for you and all this stuff,
Yeah.
right? Yeah,
And the sense of urgency that I still use today in order to be successful started there, right? Where like you don't
yeah,
have much time. Literally, you need him within a couple of hours. So you
yeah.
you start dialing, pick the phone.
That is, it's interesting you say sense of urgency. That's one of the themes I think I've picked up on this
Mhm.
year is there's a lot of agencies that started around COVID, and that's totally fine. I get
Yeah.
it, right? Like it's we need great recruiters, right? And all that. And that's it can be such a rewarding industry. I'm not trying to gatekeep people from starting an industry,
Mhm.
especially because I help
Right.
agencies. But what people have learned this year that's different than
Mhm.
2021, 2022 is, oh, it's so much harder. Things are falling through. And I'm like, welcome to normal
Right.
recruiting.
Yep.
Like, that's really like, it's just, you have to have the sense of urgency. I think people took their foot off the pedal a little bit a couple years ago because they could,
Yeah.
but didn't realize how rare that is
Mhm.
in the history of recruiting. I mean, that was like a money kind of falling from the sky, period,
Yeah.
for so many different reasons.
Yeah.
But that is not real recruiting. And a lot of it takes the sense of urgency and you be on it all the time with
Mhm.
all the roles in play, all the candidates in play. And like, man, nothing will prepare you faster than having to staff what 100, people on your
That's
books
right.
and just managing all the phone calls and what's going to come. It's like, yeah, that's where the processes are built.
Yeah.
And it kind of sounds like that's probably what happened to
Yeah,
you as well.
definitely, and,
Yeah.
I've been in agency my whole career, and, what's interesting is, like, you either feel I've worked hand in hand with our sales team in most cases, sometimes full desk, but a lot of sort of back and forth, and in some cases, you're always trying to catch up, right? Sales is everyone needs someone yesterday, and then in other times, you're going like, "Okay, now I need to put my sales hat on, and, like, I gotta figure out what relationships I have that are existing that I can pull in and try to get some of that business." It's never a perfect balance. And if it I always tell my team, like, if it was, we wouldn't exist. So it's great that sometimes there's more sales and sometimes there's more candidates. It's always just a push pull.
Yeah. We we have to
Yeah.
thrive and embrace the
Yep.
chaos. I mean, that is why, as you said, that's why we exist, right? That the whole, and it's so funny. One of the first question I literally tell everyone to ask is, why is this role
Mhm.
open? And it's amazing how many people bypass that. They just like want to get into the specs because they take the companies for at face word at face value. It's like, no, like there's an
Yep.
issue going on here. Like they might not admit or might because they don't necessarily know how to
Right.
diagnose it, right? But that's why you go to the doctor, right? It's the same thing. You're the hiring
Yeah.
doctor in a sense and trying to figure out like what is going on. Why are we talking? Because I know ideally you would figure this out
Right.
on your own if you
Absolutely.
could, right? And so just starting that over and over, it's hard, right? Like, but you learn quickly in staff because if you don't, people no show, they miss, right? Like the
Mhm.
whole thing, it's just like becomes chaotic. You can never make enough money because of the
Yeah.
margins if you don't
No,
dial that
and
in.
there's ways to have that sense of urgency without damaging relationships, right? There has to be a sense of urgency
Yes.
without impact on relationship, and that's with both clients that you're working with as well as candidates. Find ways to
Yeah.
shorten other pieces of your process in order to gain that sense of urgency, but don't let it impact those great conversations because you gain so
Yeah.
much from those.
Absolutely. Well, let's dive into that because you've built a great team and you guys have worked with bigger accounts, startups, all
Mhm.
that stuff. So I guess how do you get into this role? Well, you went from temp, you went from to executive search. Actually, let's go there first. What was the
Boy.
differences? Like what did you have? What did you learn? What did you have to kind of shift from from some of the temp and the admin
Mhm.
stuff that you were doing first?
Yeah. So, I mean, first is the pace, right? So, in a typical
Yep.
executive search, that might last anywhere from 6 months to a year. So, there's
Yep.
more of a sense of you've got it's very methodical. It's a lot like being a project manager. It's making sure your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted. Every single, we would put together dossiers of candidates that we were recommending. It was slow, and
Yeah.
slow for all the right reasons, right? But it's much more methodical, and so what became really important in that realm was communication, is making sure everyone understood what was happening. If there's not a lot of movement on a recruitment, make sure the no update is my favorite thing. It's a great tool both for candidates
Yep.
and clients, is, "Hey, even if we're working really hard, they don't know that, right? Unless they see results. So making sure you loop them in and tell them what you're doing, what your efforts are, put some data and metrics in there so they truly understand the you know wide net of people that you're looking at. Um, and making sure everyone's on board with how to kind of play that out. Now, when I came to Carex, it almost was flipping back on that urgency piece, right? It was no longer an executive search where you're retained. We're all contingency now. So the last 6 years and what we've built our company here at Carex with is contingency search, which means we're typically competing against a few other firms. We really have to hit that gas pedal very hard. And the no update thing is really important still, but it doesn't come into play nearly as often. So I would say communication is the biggest switch that I've had to turn on and off.
Gotcha. You highlighted something that is always super important. I coach ad nauseum about it. I mean, the no update is huge, but the whole showing your work, right? I think too often recruiters think showing their work is putting a bow on it, and it's almost the exact
Yeah.
opposite, right? If you set the right expectations, you got to be like, hey, we've reached out to 500 people,
Mhm.
100 have gone back to us, we've screened 30 of them. Here is what the market is telling us, and kind of almost removing yourself as the I think this, I think that, and just saying this is
Yep.
what's happening. Like this is the feedback that we're getting on the roll, being a little bit more matter of
Yes.
fact versus like feely about things.
Exactly.
Because I think that's the trap recruiters fall into,
Mhm.
right? Is like that, oh, but here's my opinion. It's
Yeah.
like, well, we're not really paid for our opinion in terms of like a lot of
Mhm.
things, like in terms of logistics in the market, but we have to kind of earn that. Like, here's what the market is saying. We're more delivering information, gathering and delivering versus like I think
Yeah,
this and kind of being the final determinant. It's like a nuance,
totally.
right? And it's like if you're doing that and showing your work, you can be it's like that's the line you want
Yeah.
versus trying to like here's what I
Yeah.
presented to you. Like it's all wrapped up. Like, don't you
Mhm.
like it? They're like, no. Like they
Oh,
treat
yeah,
it like a 3-year-old, right? They'd rather play with the box in the present,
right.
in a sense. So
Well,
it's just like that's like a key
yeah,
distinction.
yeah, you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. I mean, ideally, right, we have a new opportunity and within 72 hours we have 3 perfect candidates, right? Bullseye. And sometimes that
Right.
happens. That's great. Um, 9 times out of 10 though, you're not, yeah, I tell my team this a lot too. We don't get the easy ones. If they were easy, they wouldn't call us and pay for us, right? So we have to make sure we're communicating what those challenges are. Usually, if you're working with a hiring manager or HR, they're already pretty aware of what the challenges are, right? But that reinforcement
Yeah.
of here's what we're seeing, like you said, like here's the data, report the news. We don't have to feel frustrated about it. We don't have to feel regretful about it. It just is. And that way it gives that
Yes.
HR or hiring manager something to pull up the ranks, right? Where if the VP in that department's frustrated by why aren't we having more candidates here? Why hasn't this job been filled? It gives them a little armor to take to that VP and say, hey, this is what we're up against, right? Do we have some more budget we could find? Do we have some more latitude around remote versus on site? It gives them the armor that they need. And then that strengthens your relationship with that hiring manager or HR too, because you're helping them in other ways, not just finding great candidates.
Absolutely. It's kind of I use a lot of football analogies because
Yeah,
that's where I started
I'm
my
down with that. I
career,
like
and I grew up in New England in the
yeah,
Tom Brady era. So it just is what it is. And you said you got Packers. You
you
said,
bet.
yeah. We're taking a lot of the old Packers people onto the Patriots and hoping we can start to draft well again, but
We'll
we'll
see.
see. Um, We'll see. But it's the scouts.
Mhm.
Like recruiters are scouts, right? Not necessarily the head coach, right? You're not the one calling the shots of
Mhm.
the company. You're not the even the quarterback on the field. Like we're scouts. Like we're out there to go find the talent, identify the best talent. In the college ranks as they would for scouts. Like that's what we're doing and preparing the reports. And here's what's
Yeah.
out there. But you coach and you general manager, you're making the final pick. But we're doing all the
Mhm.
legwork. And I think if more, and I've been saying that like recruiters are the guide, not the
Right.
hero of the hiring
I love that.
story,
Yeah.
right? And so like yeah, you got to kind of like look at
Yeah.
it that way. And when you do that, it unlocks. It's like managers are like, "Oh, you get it. Like you get your role
Mhm.
in all this, and it's a significant one, but you have to get it first, and then you can start really being a
Right.
consultative, right, versus transactional." And it's like, man, that mindset shift is so big because I'm sure you, like me, have wasted a lot of time early on being like, "I like, but I'm so good, like." I know it
Yeah, yeah,
all. Like I
right.
got this. It's like no, it's not necessarily
Right.
about you getting this. It's about you gotta getting the
Right.
information that's necessary to kind of like so executive can make what like they can react
Yeah.
accordingly, right? Or respond
And
accordingly.
that's
Yeah.
why Carex is the foundation of the company is long-term relationships, not transactional, which I think sometimes
Yeah.
agency recruiters and salespeople get that wrong. It's like make the fill, get to the next thing. And yes, that
Yeah.
mentality is important for making sure you're, bringing enough money to pay your own paycheck.
Money.
But
Yeah.
that short-term view is just gonna cut you off at the knees, right? You have to have a little bit of long-term strategic hat on when you're having those conversations and when you're
Yeah.
making, decisions on any given Tuesday, it's gonna affect that relationship long term, and that's where you wanna go, right?
So exactly. So to that point, how do you when you're building out your team, when you're
Mm.
hiring, I guess how have you built the infrastructure to make sure because it can be easy for us to get it. But how to build that into the culture and have that permeate? How have you
Yeah.
attacked that, right? How do you guys
So
do
we're a
that?
little bit atypical, and again, the company was founded on doing staffing a little differently, right? So one of those core
Yeah.
principles I'd mentioned is long-term relationships. Another is, hey, let's make sure we're very transparent about pay rates and bill rates. We have a consulting staff, right? Some of
Yeah.
those principles. One of those is how do we encourage long tenures and a team that gels, that people want to come to work, that it's not that you feel like you're sitting on an island or that you're kind of butting heads with your colleagues every day because they might own a candidate and you might own the rec, right? So for
Right.
us, that meant flipping the team building sort of mentality on its head. And so we compensate people differently, right? Our recruiters are not commission based recruiters. We have a profit share program. So when the company succeeds, we all succeed. And what that does is it encourages the recruiters to do a couple of things. One is sort of that information sharing, that expertise sharing, teaching each other, right? Because we have a nice diverse group of junior recruiters and senior recruiters. So I want them to be talking. I want them to be sharing tips and tricks with each other. I want them to say, "Hey, this is how I've been using AI," right? Like I need that
Yeah.
because if I don't have that, then I have some very unsuccessful junior recruiters and some senior recruiters who are going, "Why am I working at a firm that doesn't pay me commission?" So it gives them sort of that
Right.
opportunity. What's important, of course, in that then is finding people who are in recruiting for something other than just making good money, right? Because you can
Yeah.
be a recruiter and make good money just about anywhere. But here, we want to make good money and do really good things for the industry, right? We want to treat our candidates with kindness and respect. We're never going to ghost you. We want to change the industry a little bit. And so I feel like that is the compelling reason people have stayed on our team too, is because we're doing something other than just filling jobs. We're going
Gotcha.
the extra mile for candidates, and we're again trying to change the industry a little.
Absolutely. So when a lot of owners are going to hear this, they'd be like, all right, right. With the, it's, commission, there's a reason people go back to that,
Mhm.
right? That sense of urgency. How does that make you, how does that make you different than, say, internal, right? Or being a corporate kind of recruiter? Like, what's that? how do you still keep that like drive, that fire going? And profit
Yeah,
sharing is a big one,
totally.
right? And for sure, that I'm sure that's probably might be the
Mhm.
answer. But like, it's still in the day to day when it's like I got to get those extra few screens or
Yeah,
like kind of go the extra mile, right? How are you still making sure? I guess kind of creating that infrastructure to make sure
yeah.
that happens.
So, right, the question is how do you motivate people then, right, if they're not working for a
Yep.
commission? I think couple things. So I had mentioned screening for the right motivators. I think Carex has been lucky in
Yeah.
that we're only 7 years old. So you get to be a part of a startup. That's cool.
Yeah.
We have a very flexible kind of working environment. So some of us are, I'm at home, as you can tell. A lot of us are remote. You can
Yeah.
come into the office once in a while. We have a lot of like fun team kind of get togethers. Um, so there's pieces of that, but I actually don't think that that's the real reason people are motivated. I think people are motivated to win, right? So when we screen for
Yeah.
internal teams, we talk a lot about what keeps things going. And I think in recruiting, we all like to make placements, right? That feels good. But what about
Yeah.
uh, opening a new sourcing project and having that perfect candidate get back to you? That's a win, right? So let's recognize and
Yeah.
reward that. So our culture is a little different in that the way that we identify success is not just placements. We're looking at professional development that you're doing. We're looking at submissions, how many candidates you've sent out. Look at our Google reviews. What are candidates saying about you? All of that
Yeah.
matters a lot, and they can continue to grow their base compensation with their success, right? So it's not like you come in and this is all the money you're ever going to make, right? As you continue to grow and make
Yeah.
Carex more successful as a company, you'll also be compensated for that. I also think there's this funny thing, and I haven't worked at ten agencies, right? I've only had a couple agencies in my background, but there is this level of like, I want to win for Carex, right? There's a buy in to the brand that we have because it is a little bit different. And so whenever we're up against competitors, we're all up against competitors. It's sort of like, don't mess with my colleague because they're with
Yeah.
me. It does feel more like a team environment.
I love all that. The small wins and kind of how you identify success, I think, is
Yeah.
really key. And something I've picked up working with a lot of agencies, talking to a lot of owners, a lot of recruiters, because I get the 411 on what's
I
going
bet,
on
yeah.
behind the scenes, just being in the position
Mhm.
I'm in. Uh, it's it's one of those things that it takes a lot of work on the front
Mhm.
end, but that is ultimately what matters, because even if you're, say if you're a commission only recruiter, you make 30 placements, right? An average fees 20 grand. You could bill
Yep.
500K in a year. Not a
Yeah.
bad year, right? That's 30 days you get a win, right? Maybe you get a couple offers in the same day, it's
Yeah.
29, right? What are you doing the other 320 days? Like what does that
Mhm.
look like? How are you how do you keep going in the
That's
grind? Especially now, I mean, I have seen more counter
mhm.
offers and stuff falling apart at the offer stage from what I've been hearing than almost like any other
Mhm.
time, because there's like just like an interesting thing going on kind of in the market with like a candidate client
Yeah.
tug of war that's always happening. Those small wins are huge. I think recognizing that, and I see that in the coaching
Mhm.
program. It's what we start off every single group call. What are the small wins that we have for the last week? Like who has small wins they want to
Yeah.
share? Now, half the time they end up being huge wins. Or like, all right, we got to re-identify what a small win is here, guys. Like, signing a contract is a
Yeah.
big win, right? And other different things. So, but like, it's so that's why we do it as well, because it's so important. People can be so hard
Yes.
on themselves. It's really easy to and to be down in this industry. So I love that you
Mhm.
say that. I'm not surprised to hear that, because it's all kind of aligned with what I would assume like that is how you kind of build the culture, because it's either going to be cutthroat competitive and candidate ownership and client owner,
Mhm.
like as you said, client ownership, which is doable, but brings its own kind of challenges versus like this. It's like, okay, that's creating the infrastructure, kind of some of the environment.
Absolutely.
Like, yeah, I could get behind that. And I think a lot of recruiters like want to do that, right? Like they're down to work hard. It's just like I just want the day to feel like I'm walking in molasses in a sense, right? Trying to do
That's
the
just
job.
right. And, we've all had that month where we've had 3 bridesmaids, and you're like, "Cool." right? And so,
Yeah. What the Katherine
oh,
Heigl movie, right? What is
yeah,
it?
yeah,
27
27
Dresses or
Dresses
whatever? That's old school rom-com now. Yeah.
a
Yeah.
classic. So if you haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think that there's a level of psychological safety that you can come to every day with work going, "Hey, if the candidate doesn't accept the offer, that's not gonna impact my ability to take a trip or to, afford my mortgage or my rent," right? That is different. In a very traditional commission-based environment, that can impact you, and so what the trickle-down effect of that then is you put people in a position where they either have to make the placement or they have to be impacted dramatically in a personal way. And so what happens
Yeah.
in my experience, and I've heard lots of horror stories, is that recruiters then convince candidate to take jobs. They're maybe a little unethical, maybe they bend the truth just a little bit because they like need to make the placement. And I don't blame them for that, right? I think it's the systematic unfortunate sort of impact of having a commission only kind of compensation plan.
Yeah. I'm with you. It's something that I've had to tell my team, my wife, as she started recruiting last fall, is all you can do is build the rapport, right, and build the
Mhm.
engagement uh, with the candidate, and kind of what we've talked about, right? Just be the messenger in a
Right,
sense. But hey, just any updates, just let me know when you're in,
right.
right? Like my job is to make the best match for you. I'm obviously a little bit biased. I would
Yeah,
like you to work for our
exactly.
client, but I get it. Always can't work out, but I'm just on a need to know
Yeah,
basis. So that's consider me that.
exactly.
Like all I need to know is just know the information, and I can handle. I'm a big boy, a big girl. I can handle the rest. Just like keep me in the loop. Like if we can agree on that, like we're
Yeah,
good, right? And you do that, tends to kind of work
yeah,
out more often than
yep,
not, right? And even if a candidate goes elsewhere, like they remember that experience, and that if they go to the other company, if they're hiring level, guess who they're
exactly.
going to call? Hey, I love the way you
Yeah,
worked with me, right? Or they refer to their manager. It's just like this is a recruiter, this is a firm you should work with,
absolutely.
right? It's just like it's all silk. I'm sure you
Yeah,
see that all
and
the
you're
time.
yeah, I actually got
Yeah,
a email this morning from someone who was a candidate who now wants to do business with us. It happens constantly.
there it is.
And it's
Yeah.
because, it's like the quote of like people don't always remember what happened, but they remember how you made them feel. And we know how traumatic it is sometimes to go through a job search process. It's really scary and it's hard and it's confusing. And there's a lot of information coming at you. People are going to remember the person who was like kind, followed up when they were supposed to, who gave them good advice, who maybe connected them to an opportunity, even if it's not something they're working on. And so we know that is sometimes a good business generator, but it's also, we know the average tenure is a couple years. So even if that candidate takes the other offer in a couple years when they're looking again, you really want them to call you first, right? And by behaving in
Yeah.
a way that is friendly and concerned about the long term relationship, that changes that equation.
Yeah, I love that you guys have the approach of just plant the good seeds,
Yeah.
enough good seeds, and the fruit will
Mhm.
grow. Like that is, man, it's hard to have that discipline sometimes in this industry to just do
Well,
that, but it is so positive
and
long term, like
so
so positive.
sometimes, and it's sometimes it's literally walking away from money, right? Like we've had an
Yep.
experience where we worked with a client, decided, we actually don't want to pay for this, so we're not going to hire this person. And we said, well, but they really want the job and you want them to work there. So like how can we help facilitate that, right? And we were able to bring it to some moderate terms of them being able to move forward. And again, because that's the right thing to do. It's the right thing for the client. It's the right thing for the candidate. It impacted us a little from a financial standpoint, right? But we also talk about like the karma bank. It's like, okay, put that into the karma bank and hopefully it'll come back around. Sometimes it
Yeah.
doesn't, sometimes it doesn't, right? But at the end of the day, you can sleep well knowing that you followed your own values and ethical compass.
So interesting. So the client, I mean, it was just kind of a crazy circumstance, or they were just like, wait, we can't pay like a recruiting fee,
Yeah.
like how do you handle a client like that, right? Because I think to me, I'd be like, wait, do I want to put someone there, right? In a sense that's going to approach business that way,
Right.
right? Like, it's almost like the Spider Man, right? Everyone gets one in a sense, maybe, but I
Yeah.
don't know.
Well,
It's
you're right, it
yeah,
doesn't happen very often, right? And,
yeah,
especially once, the candidate's already been through the process and we're kind of at that two-yard line,
yeah,
but like most things, it was a very understandable, situation, right? It was like things happen, and so I think that kind of human approach too of like, "Hey, I get that this isn't
yeah,
what either of us set out to do here. How
yeah,
can we just look forward, right? There's no
yeah.
sense in sitting in the gunk.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and when you're set up the way you are, you can do that,
Mhm,
right? If that was commission based, that's
exactly.
tough. Imagine that recruiter. You'd be like, the recruiter did all the work. Like, it's not necessarily me you're screw it's
Yep,
that person that did all this
yep,
work, right? And it's like flipping on their business. Like, imagine if you did all that for a client and they're like, what would you say to them? Like, absolutely not. Well, exactly. Guess how we feel. So it's kind of
yeah,
one of those. We'll get into clients a little bit, but I think the candidate thing's pretty interesting. You guys are so focused on that, which is great. What are some of the best
mhm,
practices that you guys see on kind of highlighting the candidate experience and kind of guess what does that look
yeah.
like in action
Yeah,
a
good
little bit?
question.
Yeah,
Before I jump into that too much, the other one other really, really important, component to the recipe for building teams, especially if it's not commission-based
yeah,
structure, is having good reporting
yeah.
and data, right? So that you can make
Yes.
sure that especially recruiters who are growing in their career, that they're doing the right things in order to be successful, because otherwise,
Yeah.
they can be working really hard and it actually doesn't matter, right? So I think tracking data, having good dashboards and reporting, that's a continuous journey, but I found it to be key in
Yeah.
order to manage performance.
Be productive, not busy,
Ex-
right?
Exactly.
I mean, it's the key. Is that something you're checking typically on a daily, on a weekly, monthly, quarterly? Like, what's the best cadence you found kind of as a manager to kind of track some of those things and see
Yeah, I
signals
would say I'm looking at our dashboards every other day, right? And it's not to
every day? Yeah.
look at them to create a judgment. It's a look at them to just kind of see how things are going. And if
Yeah.
it's a really quick way to identify if someone's having a rough week, right? It's just an easy way to just reach out and say, "Hey, I noticed this thing," before it gets to the degree of, "Hey, we're gonna have to put you on a performance improvement plan," because right, the numbers aren't there. You want to, if there are challenges that someone's experiencing both from a personal and professional level, you want to know of that as soon as possible, and the only way to get that easily is
Yeah.
with data.
It's I'm glad you said that because it is the signals are key.
Mhm.
Because I get managers be like, "Oh, I don't want to be a micromanager," and I got recruiters like, "Oh, I don't want to be micromanaged." I'm like, but what does that like mean to you? Because there's different approaches. Because if I don't track data or I don't know what's
Yeah.
going on, it's good. And those are things I'm always trying to figure out in our own business agencies, like the best ways
Yeah.
to do that, and what are the numbers that are important to track beyond just placements. Um, it's it is that it's like, hey, we're doing this. If it's done the right way, we can get ahead of the
Mhm.
curve on stuff. I think that's an important distinction. It's good for people to hear that it is doable, and that's like that should be the goal
Yeah.
around this stuff, right? Is to be able to catch things before and not just be a way to slap people on the wrist, which a lot of agencies do, right? They have data of like, are you making your
Yeah.
200 calls today? Like, I think that's what people think of, and like, this is
Yeah.
not that. Like, this is way different. There's like completely different ways to
Mhm.
attack numbers and data and how you look at it. Tracking it is different than in terms of how people
Right.
interpret it and what they do. But I know some people have been scarred with
Yeah.
some of those types of
Yeah.
agencies where it's like they get yelled at for stuff that doesn't
For
really
sure.
matter, move the
Like,
needle.
I don't wanna be held accountable for making 20 calls if actually it's doable in 4, right? Like, it's a
Right.
strange thing for me to hear about some of the goals that are handed without much context around if is that person a senior tech recruiter or someone who's recruiting engineering professionals, right? It should matter a lot what you're recruiting for and for what partners and what geographies, because that all provides a little bit of color on what success looks like.
Absolutely. And people are thinking, well, it sounds like a lot of work. It is. That's why you're dedicated to the role. Like it is a
And it's a
lot of
lot
work.
of stuff, yeah,
And
yeah,
it's a I think I think people just having respect for
yeah.
that work, like that's what it takes. And then people ask, like, how do I scale a team? Well, get a recruiting manager.
Mhm.
That's really
Yep,
good. because that'll save your life,
Absolutely.
right? And like that's really it,
Mhm.
and that's one of the things that potentially for our agency I might be kind of looking at down the road because I mean we're small. I mean we're small. It's like six of us
Yeah.
right now, but it's once you start getting even past that number in the 10 plus, like you have to have it,
Mhm.
right? And it really requires it because it's so easy for things to go off
Right.
track so
Yep.
quickly.
And we
So quickly, and that's how people get these bad habits, these bad KPIs. 'Cause I feel like they're just behind the 8 ball. They're trying to just do
Yeah.
anything
Yep.
to make it work.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and what I would say, especially with, the size that you're at right now, it's like if I could go back in time and change something, it would have been creating a little bit more of those standards a little earlier on,
yeah,
because you have to have some sort of benchmarks. If you've got a team of 6, you can kind of see like, oh, these people are performing really well. Cool, make that a benchmark, right? You have a little bit of sample size,
mm,
and then you can adjust it when your team is a little bit smaller. Then after that, it's just impacting a lot more people at that point in time.
abs absolutely. Yeah, it's one of the things I've seen with our team. It's like the activity's always there.
Mhm.
Like, there's no issue
Right,
there. It's always gonna be about, you know, how can we just constantly just be more efficient,
right.
right? More effective, like, just quicker. Like, that's always the thing, but I can always work with people that are down to work.
Yes.
I don't mind that at all.
Yep.
We can always kind of right mold the clay a little bit versus there's nothing here to work with.
Right.
And I think that's like the positive piece and seeing stuff with like messaging and bring people in and not over promising, right? A lot of that. Well, now we can get into it. The candidate experience. That's a lot of. I know what I really highlight is like let's not over promise anything. Let's almost undersell, right?
Mhm.
Under promise and over deliver. Like, hey, this could work. This could be potential. I did some research. I think like, what are your thoughts? Like, where are you at in the process? Right? Kind of let me know, and then you do that enough times, like you're good.
Yeah.
But kind of, what have you seen kind of work for the candidate
Yeah,
experience
so
for your team?
candidate experience is the thing that I'm probably the most passionate about after internal,
Yeah,
making sure our team is feeling supportive and successful. Then for me, my core focus tends to be on the candidate side less than the sales side. Um, so, I think for us, the best investment we have made aside from our people is an automation tool, and it helps automate some of those candidate communications in a way that is really personable, a way that doesn't feel super corporate-y, a way that doesn't feel like they're getting spammed. Um, and it's how you set it up, right? Like not every automation tool is good. We're all on those sales automations that are gross.
yeah,
I get one from Donald Trump all the time. It makes me laugh. Uh, so, I think that to us was such a game changer because it allowed us to stay in front of our candidates. It allowed that, one of the biggest we heard from our candidate base, one of the biggest frustrations is never hearing back from that consulting firm. And the reality is, sure, companies aren't always good at rediscovery and making sure they know who to reach out to. But the reality is, a lot of times you don't hear from us because we don't have the right role for you. It might be 3 months before I have that perfect opportunity to share with you. But in that interim, they need to know that we haven't forgotten about them, right? And we know that, but they don't know that. So having some sort of cadence of regular communication of, hey, we're still keeping an eye out for you. How's your search going? Giving them a prompt to
yeah,
respond to us too, so that it just deepens that relationship. And we laugh sometimes because candidates will hold on to that automation for 3 or 4 months and then respond much later saying, okay, now I actually want to search for something new, right? So they kind of
mm,
push that off. And there's so many competitors in the recruiting space that, they have lots of options on they decide to do a job search. Cool. You can go Google it and find the top 4 companies and work with them. I want them to just come to us first. Sure, go work with others later. But
yeah,
right. So it gives you a little bit of that competitive advantage. The other piece, so the never hearing from the staffing firm again, that was a huge one for us. The other one was just ghosting, right? So we have a report set up that's like a Ghostbuster report where if you've got a candidate submitted to a client and it's been a week with no activity, you get this automation that says, hey, reach out to your person, right? So it makes it very easy for recruiters to not lose sight of who's in the mix, because when we're not super busy, it's just an expectation that you know who's in who's where in this in the process, right? But when you get
Yep.
busy, it's a whole lot harder because you're having to make decisions about, do I go source on the super urgent role, or do I get back to the 3 people that I need to get back to today? So that automation
A-
allows us to have that safety net, that really matters a lot.
Absolutely, it's huge, and I know there's someone I talked to is Billy Davis, who's a bullhorn. I think he
Mhm.
started Here Fish, and
I
he's
know him.
big. Yeah,
Yeah,
is that who
yeah,
you work with?
it
Yeah,
is.
he's the
He's
man
the
on
man. Yep.
automations on ATS automations. Like, yeah, he
Yeah.
gets it. So it's like I have my LinkedIn stuff that I know how to do there, but like as ATS automations, like yeah,
He's a
he's
pro.
he's he's the
Yep.
guy. Yeah, I work with Daniel Miller as well. He's also awesome with
Uh-huh.
automations. But like Billy was like the first person I talked to a couple years ago about that, and then he just like took off on LinkedIn. It was pretty cool. So yeah, I've always just been like, yep, he got it. Like with
Yes.
the automation piece, I'm like, that's exactly how it should
Mhm.
work. It's so important. Like just being intentional there. Like it's the same thing we're doing with LinkedIn. You know, some of the automation there and the
Mhm.
content, it's just staying top of mind. It's staying
Yep.
relevant. Like you see me on the feed or in the inbox, like just being top of mind is it. If you can automate
Right.
that, you don't have to be spammy.
No,
You don't have to promise people 50 leads a month or whatever that we all get in our
exactly.
inbox. It's just be chill and be top of
Yeah,
mind. Like that's kind of like that's like the
yeah,
approach. Because if you just do that, you win
for
it over
sure.
time. Yeah.
And we also have a texting tool, right, which you can sync to the automations. We haven't done a ton of that yet, but that's something that we want to jump into a little bit more. And I think what I love about texting is it does create this little more of like this friendly relationship with their candidates. Obviously their
Yep.
speed to reply is better via text, right? We get like faster responses and the higher rate of
Yeah.
return on our texts than we do our emails, so that's great. But I also just like the vibe that it gives. And, we always encourage our teams here to, be a friend to your candidate, which sounds a little on the line of like, is that appropriate? But genuinely, some
Yeah.
of my friends are people that I've recruited over the years because you stay in touch.
Yeah.
And I think our approach is a very sort of casual approach. We don't, no one wants someone with a suit on every day to be talking to them about health insurance, right? They want someone they feel like they can trust. And so if we can approach it
Yeah.
from this sort of very friendly, very casual, like, hey, I got your back. Hey, you have an interview today, you're going to kill it, right? That's kind of our brand. And I do think that helps in that candidate experience because we kind of go through that with them. We're disappointed if they don't get the job offer. We're ecstatic when they do, right? It's sort of, I'm going to be your partner in crime versus I'm going to be the person who's going to try and convince you to take a job.
Yeah, it's a career-long cheerleader,
Yeah.
right? And it's very much like an agent-athlete relationship to keep the sports metaphor going,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's like Jerry Maguire on steroids a little bit, right?
Mhm.
This whole thing. So it's if you can build a system around that, right? And as James Clear says, right, you fall to the level of your
Mhm.
systems. Well, if you have a system around that, and then it just makes the call and the rapport much easier, right? It's like it funnels everything to a much more impactful
Yeah.
call and interaction um, over and over and over again. You think about the amount of hours our teams are on the phone every
Right.
year. It's like if you're putting that in a positive direction, like man, that's like it's so much more effective, and you're building a real asset there over
Well,
time.
and it just
So
makes your job more fun too, right? Like when someone's able
yes,
to break down barriers and talk to me like I'm a real human and I can talk to them like they're a real human, which, shocker, we both are. It's just more fun.
yeah,
It creates these deeper relationships that are a little more meaningful. And that's honestly one of the things that's kept me in the recruiting world for so long. I think there's a ton of burnout in our industry, as you know, too. So always being aware of
yeah.
how we can avoid that for people. And I think real relationships will keep people going.
I agree. That to me, that's content. That's what
Yeah.
content does. It gets people to know me and know the recruiters that we're coaching. Just they feel like they know
Yeah.
you before they
Yep.
talk to you, right? So you have it with the follow up with people that you've already talked to, but also just the people, the pre people that you've never talked to, the pre call. I've gotten that. I mean, people hop on the phone with me like, I feel like I know you because I see you on my feed every
Right.
day, twice a day. I'm like, I've listened to your podcast. I'm like, great. Like this is like, and that's what I reverse engineered. I wanted all my time on the
Yeah.
phone to feel like I could already, I could skip the formalities because I hate
Yeah. I
formalities
wanna talk about the
so
weather.
much, you know. Yeah, it's, it's I'll complain about it,
Yeah.
like, we had a
Yeah, right.
tornado warning this morning, and we were down in the basement, like, that's
Right.
interesting
That's cool.
weather talk, uh, but yeah, the old, like, "Oh, man,"
Mhm.
like, another day in Ohio, right? It's like, yeah, one of those, like, "Alright, like, what," like, let's get to the chase, but also just removing the friction of, "Oh, it's another recruiting agency," or "It's
Right.
another coach," right? Someone else trying to sell me
Yep.
something. I just, like, wanna get over that as
Mm.
soon as possible. I don't care about selling. Like, I'm
Mhm.
good, right? Like, I just like, does it make sense to work together? Like,
Right.
I'm always looking for. I would say like the 1,000 people, the 1,000 recruiters and agencies that I
Yeah.
can work with. Like, that's who I want. That's who I'm finding. Like, that's who I'm at every day. Like, I just want to know, like, are you in or are you out? Like, I'm good with either answer, but that's all
Yep.
I'm looking for. And that's why I kind of tell people to approach it that way. Like, build your systems around that, not trying to work with
Mhm.
everyone, but work with, again, your vibe attracts your tribe. So I think put it out there and then like see who
Yeah.
resonates with it from a client and candidate perspective.
Absolutely, and that kind of transparent approach, it's not only good for business, but it also creates a really nice referral base too, right? If you're always very clear about,
Yep.
"Hey, thank you so much for reaching out. This is our approach. These are our lines of business." It doesn't really sound like that's what you need, but here's 3 other companies that you can work with, right? So
Exactly.
we play very friendly in our space, and maybe it's the Midwestern in me, but I'm like, "Hey, if I can't help you, I know people
Yeah.
who can." And so, both from a, client perspective and also with candidates is if I'm like, "Hey, if this candidate's not a great match for Carex, I have resources and I have other firms that I can refer you to." And the beauty of that is you do that enough and they'll refer people to you as well, right? It's kind of that quid pro quo.
Yeah, it all kind of works into like that ecosystem, like flywheel, and it's just like generating that momentum to get
Yeah.
it working for you, right? It's like getting the bike going,
Mhm.
or anything like that, right? It's just like it's just the work on
Yeah.
the front end that it can really, really
Yep.
pay off. Um, I know we're gonna have to wind it down, but I wanted to cover because you guys work with some big companies. Obviously, you don't have to name any
Yeah.
names, but Fortune 500 to startups, and you mentioned about like 15
Yep.
producers, right? So that's, I mean, some big names for what people. It's not, not like a Robert Half or an
Mhm.
Aerotech. And how do you guys like handle that, right? How do you kind of almost get them in the door and kind of handle that delivery with the success that you guys
Yeah,
have had?
I would say in our experience, those larger corporate entities, it's just about time. Patience and
Yeah.
persistence is where it's at. And if you
Yeah.
have run into enough roadblocks with a potential client, take a pause if you need to, right? Give it 2, 3 months and
Yes.
then go back to it. And just that relentless approach. And I'm not saying continue to email or spam the same person. That's not what I mean. But there's enough people in a company of that size. You have to find those inroads, and whether that's a candidate you've worked with in the past, or whether that's a friend of your neighbor, right? You have to start to do the 6 degrees of connection and figure out who could be your
Yeah.
cheerleader and your champion within that company. And then be willing to just sort of be patient as the paperwork is handled and as you, right? Um, it just takes time and a lot of effort. Track your efforts. Make sure you, like we talked about, making sure you understand your wins so you don't burn yourself out. But take those small wins, celebrate them, and just keep on plugging away. That sort of relentless nature is the only way you get those big partners.
I think that's very well said,
Yeah.
especially to take a break and get back to it later. I think
Yep.
a lot of people take a break and never get back to it, and that's definitely a mistake, right? Or
Yeah.
reroute another direction, another department. I think is,
Yep.
yeah,
And the
fantastic.
reality is that, leaders leave, right? There's new leadership that comes
Yes.
into those companies every few years. There's a shakeup. So there's always going to be some opportunity. So that's actually, it works for you and against you, right? So if you have a stronghold and a really great partner you've worked with for years, You have to always be looking ahead and saying like, when is that person going to retire? When are they bringing in new executive leadership? Because that can impact you a lot too. Um, and then I would say with smaller ones, uh, man, I love working with startups. It's so much fun.
Mm.
That's all about the network that you have, right? Our founders had a really strong healthcare, health tech background. And so we had this innate sort of network that was already built into our business where when young health tech companies started hiring and scaling, we were their first call. And so I think whatever, if you're first starting out, you don't have much of a network, right? But find your people, find an industry you want to focus on, be focused with finding some very specific group with a specific skill set so that you can start to have that type of network around you.
The network, the expertise, and I think one thing we haven't covered, but like that key piece with the culture you have, I think the way you compensate with some of the
Mhm.
network relationships is that initial intake, that discovery is like always be qualifying,
Yeah.
right? The role, if it's contingent, whether it's exclusive or
Mhm.
competing with other agencies, right? Like I think I got to imagine the secret sauce is the way you're qualifying the roles and keeping on that. Like it has to be. But I'm sure you could talk about it a little bit more.
Mhm.
But like that's probably like the one missing thing. But people have heard us talk about on this podcast before, but maybe not this. But I don't know if you have any kind of thoughts there or kind of the emphasis you guys put on that
Mhm.
piece of the process.
Yeah, you cut out for just a second, but I know where you're going. So,
Yeah.
the what struck me is that each year, especially in a smaller startup scaling company, each year our qualifying process looks a little bit different, right? So, roles that we maybe would say no to in a very busy year, we might work on those in a different year, right? So, I think that
Yep.
aligns really well with that long-term relationship strategy of if it's a role we think that we're not going to be able to give eyes to it, not going to be able to give it a lot of effort, just being really honest about, hey, our pipeline for talent in that space isn't great. We will keep our eyes open though, right? We really want to continue to make sure that relationship is intact, even if you're having to say no about that role. And we found too that clients are really they appreciate the candor, right? Like, okay, cool. I know that Carex is probably not going to be able to help me out here. So now I can go and call some other people if I need to. To your point, never over promising, making sure that you're putting the most efforts in the areas where you think there's long term relationship.
Yeah. That's perfect. That's how you
Yeah.
draw it up. I love it. Well, anything, I guess anything you want to leave kind of the listeners
Yeah.
with, or, like the one piece you have advice for, say, recruiters starting out
Yeah.
or a leadership team, what we
Yeah.
got?
Well,
Yeah.
first, I didn't say this before, but the Jerry Maguire reference, I don't know how you know that that's my favorite movie of all time, but that to me, it encapsulates a little bit of like when I came to
Mm.
Carex, I talked to our founder and I said, "No, no, no, I'm not going to go. If I leave this company, I am going to get out of TA agency at least space. I don't want to recruit for another agency because I had this vision in my mind of what agency recruiting was like, which was like Jerry Maguire, right? Whereas like people just
Yeah.
racking in commission checks and it's cutthroat and you're kind of at odds with your colleagues and that's not the environment I wanted to be in. And then of course in talking more with Rachel and learning more about her vision for the company, I got on board very fast. But I would say, that advice is find your people, right? So if you're in an agency right now or if you're starting out right now and it does not feel right, it's not right, right? If you've given it 3 4 months and it doesn't feel like it's jiving, it's chances are you're not set up for success. So whether that's pivoting to doing your own thing, whether that's consulting or whether that's going internal team, I think recruiters have one of the best qualities a recruiter can have is that tenacity and that inability to give up, right? It's not that we need to be motivated, it's that we have this inability to give up. And I've seen
Yeah.
people stay in roles too long or in icky environments too long because they won't give up. They're like, no, I'm just going to push through this. Give it a little time, but if it's not right, don't necessarily think you need to leave the profession. Just maybe look around at other shops.
It's fantastic advice. And I probably wish I had that advice about
Mm.
6 years ago when I left Aerotech, because I thought I was just
Yeah.
done forever with recruiting because I didn't know anything else existed,
Right.
and a lot has obviously changed since then. But that's how I felt at the time, like burnt out, not good enough to be there, yada yada. I
Mhm.
mean, I was growing every year, but I was like, this doesn't align with how I want to operate, and I don't care about the incentives that they have.
Right.
So I was just like, well, I guess I'm just like not meant for
Yeah.
this. Uh,
Yeah,
now here we are.
exactly.
Little bit of a reroute, but we
Yeah.
got there. But it's great advice because I wish I had gotten that 6 years
Yeah,
ago.
because this
Um,
can be a
yep.
long-term career that you can have work-life blend and balance in too, right? That your success is not dictated by the fact that you took a vacation last week. You can have vacations and still be successful in this career as well. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So, well, I love it. I love your approach, and I thank you for
Yeah.
sharing your story. It's a super fun conversation, and kudos to y'all for doing it the right way, and definitely inspirational for the listeners and people building agencies. Like, it is doable. There is a
Mhm.
blueprint. You can do it the right way,
Absolutely.
and I know this gave a big roadmap for that. Um, I know people can reach you on
Yeah,
LinkedIn, right? They'll
please.
connect with you. We'll have your LinkedIn URL on the episode pages, wherever someone's listening to this, right? So they can connect with you on LinkedIn. You're going to get a lot of people asking if you're
Yeah,
hiring.
good.
Just be careful.
That's okay. It's all about long-term
uh,
relationships,
yeah,
so if it's not today, someday maybe, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So you'll be building your
good,
network
good,
after this
good.
from this one. But again, just thank you so much
Yeah,
for
thank
being here,
you.
Teresa. This
Yeah,
was
this
super
is really
fun.
fun. I enjoyed it. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome, awesome. Well, cool. Well, welcome. We'll make sure to give it Teresa did awesome. So give us 5 stars on this one. Don't be the one person that gave me a 1 star rating. I'm gonna find that person one day.
I'll take it personally.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm over it. I'm over it. I forgive and forget. I give people grace. I get it. Um, uh, but make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review. All the nice review, please. All those things. And until next time, happy hunting, y'all.